Radical expressions and equations. Definition of rational exponents. If we let m over n be a rational number, where n is a positive integer greater than 1, if a is a real number such that the root n of a exists, then we know three things. The first thing is that a to the power of 1 over n is the same thing as saying root n of a. Next, if we have a to the power of m over n, that's the same thing as saying n root n of a to the m power. Similarly, it's the same thing as saying root n of a parentheses to the m power. And last, if we have a to the power of m over n, that's the same thing as saying a to the power of 1 over n to the power of m. It's also the same as saying a to the power of m to the power of 1 over n. What can we see in these three examples is that our denominator is the index of our radical, and our numerator is the power to which it's raised. So in each example, n is our denominator and our index, and m is the power. Let's do some examples. This is our first example. The first thing I want to do is I want to convert this into a radical. Negative 1/25. I know that 1/25 is the same thing as saying 5 to the third. So 5 cubed, because when you take 5 times 5 times 5, well, 5 times 5 is 25. And you multiply that by the 5, and you're going to get 125. So instead of writing negative 125, what I want to do is I want to write negative fifth to the third power to the 2/3 power. And I'm going to multiply that by our 4 to the negative 5/2. Now I said that our denominator on each one of these fractions will be the index of our radical. The first one is a 3. So let's write our radical. 3, we're going to write negative 5 raised to the third power. And then we're going to leave our numerator 2 on the outside. On the next part, so I'm going to write 4, and then it's going to be in its radical. The index is 2, so it's just square root. And this is to the power of negative 5. The first radical, we have negative 5 to the third, and the radical is cube root. So we can essentially get rid of this one, and we can say negative 5 squared times 4. The square root of 4 is 2. That one's easy to know. So we have 2 raised to the negative 5th. When we have a negative on our exponent, we put it on the denominator. So then this becomes negative 5 squared over 2 to the 5th. Negative 5 squared is 25, and 2 to the 5th is 32. That is our final answer. This next one, we have a squared times b to the 9th inside of the parentheses, and we have a 1/3 on the exponent on the outside of the parentheses. What I want to do here first is I want to distribute that 1/3 to each one of our values. I'm going to distribute it to the a and to the b. So a squared 1/3, b to the 9 1/3. When we have an exponent raised to an exponent, we multiply our exponents together. So we're going to rewrite a 2 times 1/3 is 2/3. B, 9 times 1/3 is 9/3. 9/3, and that's the same as 3. So it would become b to the third, and this would be our final answer. This one is a bit more difficult, but we can still do this. Let's begin by putting our exponent on our parentheses inside of our fraction. So when we do 2 squared, because remember we got to distribute it to each one of our values. So 2 squared is going to be 4. X to the 2/3. 2/3 times 2, that's going to give us a 4/3 over y to the 1/2 times 2. 1/2 times 2 is 2/2, which is just 1. So here I'll write this on the side so you guys can see. 2 halves is equal to 1. This is all multiplied by 3x to the negative 1/6 over y to the 1/3. The next thing I want to do is I want to combine our two fractions into one. And this is multiplication, so we can just pretty much create one long fraction. 4 times 3 times now our x's. X to the 4/3 times x to the negative 1/6 over y times y to the 1/3. Our x's, they have different denominators. So I'm going to change the exponents on our x's just so we could have the same denominators. 4/3 times, I'm going to multiply by 2, is going to give me 8/6. So I'm going to change this one, and I'm going to rewrite it as 8/6. Now we have like terms on our exponents on the x's. Y times y to the 1/3. I can do the same thing here. I can change the denominator on this fraction, which is just 1. But there's really no need because 1 plus 1/3, we know that that's 4/3. So I'm going to rewrite this as y to the 4/3. 4 times 3 is going to give me 12, multiplied by x to the 8/6 times x to the negative 1/6. We just added the exponents together. 8/6 plus negative 1/6 is going to be 7/6. 7/6. We already did the y's. Y 4/3. And this becomes our final answer.